And talking about the external pressure on the Sisi regime, Financial Times editorial board published a piece recently about Egypt, and I quote, it is often assumed that Egypt is too important to fail and that the donors or Gulf states will always bail Cairo out. Do you agree with this analysis, Robert?
No.
Why?
No. Because, there are always tensions in inter-Arab relations. And so while the Gulf, wants stability in Egypt, on the other hand, they don't trust Egypt, and they don't trust Sisi.
Don't trust Sisi or Egypt?
So, pardon me?
Don't trust Sisi, trust the regime?
No, because they're aware of, he is trying to pursue his own personal interests, and that, and what he sees as the interests of the state of Egypt, which in many cases are not the same as those in the Gulf. So with regard to the Saudis, for example, it's not just the Sisi regime, but previous ones also sought to maintain reasonable relations with Tehran, other than Sadat, who once he accepted the Shah, of course it was all over with Khomeini and the mullahs. But after that, Egypt went out of its way, both Mubarak and then Morsi, to keep lines of communication open with Tehran. Sisi has not backed the anti-Iranian position of at least the Saudis and to a lesser extent other Gulf states. So that's simply an example. Sisi has not provided significant support in Yemen, which the Saudis asked him for. The Egyptians are competing with the Saudis for influence in the Red Sea and with the Emiratis. So what they want is to keep him on a tight leash that he's dependent, and he will not be able to challenge their power and authority wherever they care to assert it. If he were to do so, then they would simply cut the purse strings, and that would be the end of the story. So they sort of got him where they want him, but if he were to try to assert independence of Egypt in some meaningful way against them, then that would be it. So I don't think that we can assume Egypt is too big to fail. In the minds of some Europeans, it might be, because they would be confronted with vast amounts of illegal migration. But the Europeans are not the central actors in this drama. They are not, in any case, united. And so the central actors are the Gulf. And the Gulf have their own ambitions and desires and so on, and that puts a limit on what Sisi can do. And you can say, instead of being too big to fail from the point of view of the Gulf, he's too small to succeed. That they are going to put a limit on what he can achieve. So I don't think it's a question of too big to fail.
Yeah, and what is the role of Western governments, Robert? Because they consider Sisi as the guardian of illegal immigration. They consider him as a guarantee of stability in the region. They keep selling him weapons, but they not offering him a money support, a direct money support as Gulf countries, and they didn't drop Egypt external debt, for example, as they did with Mubarak in the Gulf War.
Yes, that's a good analogy. And so Egypt was paid off for not its military role in the Gulf, which was negligible and indeed negative in many regards, but it was a positive political role to have Arab support for the Kuwaitis against the Iraqis. That's what they got $30 billion for. So in this case, I would say that the willingness to write off $30 billion in debt is irrelevant, because the debt now is significantly in private hands. And debt relief, as we know, which involves not only governments in the West, but the Chinese, to some extent the Russians now in Egypt, and private banks, private investors, and so on. It's a very complex matter. And so much more complex than it was back in 1991. So I don't think that historical analogy is likely to hold in this case. Now, it is the case that these governments you refer to are desperately afraid of destabilizing consequences of a governmental collapse in Egypt. And so they are willing to provide financial and military support and political support to overcome that. But their capacities and their willingness to do so are limited. So if the situation were to deteriorate, let's say as it did in January, February of 2011, the ability of these governments to do something in the face of a serious challenge to the incumbent government are very limited. The Americans could do nothing, nor could the Europeans. And there is nothing to suggest that in the meantime, they've developed their abilities to have local influence of any greater magnitude than the negligible amount they had back in 2011. So the Europeans, the West in general, wants stability in Egypt. It's providing certain things to try to ensure that, but that's no guarantee. And if Sisi thinks that the West can save him in the end, he's wrong.